Welcome back. Well, confirmation now from the Judicial Service Commission that they've decided to recommend Judge Nolwazi Mabindla-Boqwana for the post of Judge President of the Western Cape. The previous person in that position was John Hlope. He had been there for 20 years. He eventually became the first judge to be impeached in democratic South Africa. He's now the Chief Whip for Umkhonto weSizwe. Yesterday, the Deputy Judge President in the Western Cape, Patricia Goliath, was asked questions for 4 hours by members of the JSC. Alison Tilley is the coordinator at Judges Matter. Alison, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. If you look at the CV of Judge Mabindla-Boqwana, she's been in the Western Cape Division, the Competition Appeal Court, at the Supreme Court of Appeal. There's a huge amount of experience there. She has some experience in the Western Cape, bit of an outsider now. The right person to take over, considering everything that's happened there?
Well, it's a difficult division. There's no doubt about that, and no one person is going to be able to fix it. But this is a judge with experience, with a great track record in judgment writing, in managing people. She's got a background in mediation. I think that she's coming with a particular angle on the Western Cape, and that she knows the division, but she's not too close to it. So I think the JSC, in looking at the candidates that they have made a really good decision, and now we'll have to see how that plays over the next couple of years.
Normally, in many positions, particularly in the judiciary, if someone is a deputy, you would think they would get appointed to the next job. And in this case, that would mean Judge Patricia Goliath. She's the Deputy Judge President of the Western Cape. She has not been promoted to the top job. I mean, was that a deliberate choice? For our interview, clearly, there were a lot of things to ask.
Well, I think one of the major problems she ran into straight away was a submission that was made by Judge Ali, who is a fellow judge in that division. And there were a number of issues that were raised in that. And I think the JSC was somewhat taken aback. It's unprecedented, I think, that one judge would write such a submission about another. And I think together with, I don't think it helped Judge Goliath that she initially said that everything in the division was fine, only to have all of the issues subsequently come out, both in her interview and in the interviews of all of the other judges. So she had a bad interview, a long interview, and I think we knew that the chances of her being appointed were slim.
So you described the Western Cape judiciary as a difficult division. And I think for a lot of people outside of the Western Cape, because he had been there for a very long time and because so many of the headlines were about him for a very long time, it became almost synonymous with now Dr. John Hlope. He was a judge at the time. It would be tempting for his critics, and there are many of them, to say all the problems in the Western Cape were the result of his behaviour. Was it more complicated than that?
Well, I think it is more complicated than that. I think it's a division in which there's been a lot of accusations and counter-accusations about racism. What we know is that young Black juniors coming into the bar struggle, and they don't seem to be able to develop good practices. You find a lot of people leave the bar at the sort of 5 to 7 year mark. And I think that then plays into difficulties, because then you don't have more senior Black judges, Black advocates, and then that in turn has a knock-on effect. So I think there's an issue around that. Of course, what's been happening in terms of the leadership of the court has exacerbated these underlying tensions, and it really does seem to have become a division where you just don't want to. You don't want to deal with your colleagues. You go to your office, and then you go home again.
Sounds like some political parties I could mention. Alison, I have to ask another question that sort of, just strikes me as we discuss this. What happened was Judge Hlope became, Dr. Hlope became the Judge President of the Western Cape at a relatively young age. It was very important at the time for lots of reasons, and his identity did matter. He was a black judge at a time when there were very few black judges. It was really important. And then, partly because of the controversy around him, through his own actions, I must say, he was found by the Judicial Service Commission to have tried to interfere with those constitutional court cases relating to then future President Jacob Zuma. But the point of that was, and one of the consequences was, that he ended up being the leader, being the Judge President of the Western Cape for a very long time. And I do wonder if maybe one of the lessons from this is that there should be some kind of term limit on how long someone can lead a judicial division. I mean, there may be strong arguments against that, but let me propose it to you. Is that one of the lessons that we can draw? It's not really about Hlope at all. It's just about having one person in a position leading a section of the judiciary for what became a very long time.
That's an interesting point. And of course, in the Constitutional Court, we do have a term limit. And I think that, in some cases, it's been argued that it's meant really capable, great judges retiring too soon, and that they then, because they have been appointed relatively young, they then leave relatively young, and then don't, make any further contribution to the bench after leaving. But I think one of the things that we do see, and I'm wondering if it's maybe more a practice now than it was then, that really judges, there's a sort of sweet spot. If you're too young, it's a problem. If you're only going to be appointed and have a year or two or three as a judge, that's also not great. But once you're sort of in your middle 50s, I think that's when a lot of people think that they have the best chance of being appointed. And of course, then that means that if you're appointed as a judge at that age, the likelihood of you being judge president, you would have to wait another 5 years or maybe more. And then that would limit the length of your term as judge president. But I have to say, it's not something we've really thought about in terms of judicial leadership.
I would like to say that the identity of a judge is not important, but I wonder specifically in the Western Cape right now, it is, and not just for issues around the judiciary, which you've already discussed, but because of what black people tell us about trying to create a life in parts of the Western Cape, particularly in Cape Town. Could the identity of Judge Mabindla-Boqwana be important? She will be an important figure. I mean, she will be at the State of the Province address, for example. I mean, these are small things, but they're very symbolic and they're very important, and she is a black woman in a province where black people, many black people, tell us consistently that they are not treated as they should be there.
I think that is indeed very important, and that's one of the reasons why I think her appointment is a good one. Yes, she's a good judge, a very good judge, and yes, she has many other skills and attributes, but she is coming into a division where a really strong judge who is also black and a woman, I think sends the right signals. And I think it might create a situation where, as a leader, I think it will be very difficult to make any accusations around racism, which I think, has really plagued the division with accusations and counter accusations. And she will be able to lead from the front. So I think it's definitely part of why the JSC has appointed her, and why she is, I think correctly so, seen as such a strong candidate, and of course why she's been appointed.
There are other things going on at the moment, and you'll know, you've been watching it far more closely than I have, but the Judicial Service Commission conducting its really, I mean, in the past we've had rounds of interviews described as a marathon, but in this case it's a sort of ultra-marathon. It's been interview after interview, and in a way we may look back at this sort of 2-3 week period as a period which really reshapes our judiciary. Now, there's a strong argument to do this. There's a shortage of judges. Many positions haven't been filled for quite a long time. Sometimes when you do it, and also getting all the members of the JSC together is a very difficult thing to do. So if you've got them in a room, lock them in the room and make the decisions. Fine. There are arguments to say, well, actually, not each candidate is getting the proper thought, or not each position, rather, is getting the proper care and attention. How do you see this period?
Well, this round of interviews has been notable for how much the sort of evenness of the interviews has improved. They are, as the JSC, using the criteria which they agreed to use. The complaints committee has been set up, and it makes sure that judges aren't ambushed with things in the interviews. And I think Chief Justice Meyer is keeping to time, not always, and of course Judge Goliath was an example of that. But I think if you look at it overall, I think we're seeing a pretty even set of interviews. I think probably one of the best rounds we've seen in many years.